Let me just stop.
Did you get my email, by the way, with some pointers and questions?
Yeah, I did.
Good.
I had about 30 seconds to glance at it. But,
well, that's fine. That's all a man of your stature needs.
Anyhow, evening, those who have attended. It's another Wednesday, late in the month, and I'll let Anthony and Hein get on with it. So thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And as always, good evening and welcome. You know, we got to do the formalities, get them out the way first. To another in the series of Talking Hi-Fi, presented by the Cape Town Hi-Fi Club. And tonight's guest is Hein of Gauteng-based Sound Structures. Now, Hein designs and builds, I hope I got that right, what many of us really only acquire as a kind of afterthought. And what I'm talking about is equipment stands and supports and racks. Now, what this entails is purpose-built stands specifically intended to optimize the performance of audio gear. Now, that's kind of the grand way of putting it. I guess the cheaper way of putting it is it gives you the sound that you thought you bought. If these pieces happen at the same time to look like pretty decent bits of furniture, well, that's a tremendous bonus for reasons that we audiophiles know only too well. So the big question is, what does a purpose-built stand do that a furniture store wall unit or a bar stool, or for that matter, a tomato box doesn't? Now, I'm going to leave the flippancy right there at the door. And Hein, before you let us in on some trade secrets, why don't you kick off by telling us how you came to choose this particular area of audio? Over to you.
Hi guys, good evening everybody, and thanks for the invite. Yeah, I think giving a little bit about my background will enlighten as to why I do what I do, why I'm passionate about what I do. I think it started off with my first introduction to better sound presentation, and that happened when I was very young. An uncle of mine was hosting a house party, and I was one of the few kids that was around, and he saw that I was sort of out of place. I didn't, fit in. I was the eighth wheel on the truck, and he said, "Come, I'm gonna, entertain you." And there was a pair of COS headphones and this tape deck, TIAC tape deck, and he pulled out this cassette that he had just recently gotten, and he slipped it in. He showed me the controls. This is 5 years old, and popped the headphones on and checked that the volume was all right, and he pushed play, and it was Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. And I sat there with my mouth open, and I thought, wow, this is like really, really cool. And yeah, my fascination with sound reproduction started then already, and has over the years evolved. And I'm one of those people that has had numerous interests in all sorts of things, mechanical, electronic. I've been through the phases that I think a lot of us have been, where during school time I would build little electronic components of all sorts. A lot of them ended up gravitating towards amplification and sound related. And then also discovering, once I started earning some pocket money, part-time work when I was in high school, more about what's what and where and how-tos of sound reproduction, of music, just appreciating music in a different way, in a better way. Ended up, long story short, working for the SABC as an engineer, as a recording engineer, and being SABC what it was, producer and a lot of other things. But my fascination with sound reproduction, music specifically, that never waned. And it was already in school when I was putting my little self-built amplifiers, and my first turntable I built myself. Didn't really work that well. But yeah, trying to get the best out of what I could afford and what I built, I came to the understanding that there are more ways to get the best performance out of certain components, like cheap loudspeakers or amplifiers or turntables specifically. It was early days, just by construction, adding, and a few other elements as well. And then, of course, the stand thing was a practical start. Fascination with loudspeaker stands before that, how they made a difference. And I had a good understanding of what was required from turntable stands and loudspeaker stands, and applied that and fiddled, and yeah, it's evolved from there. A lot of the stuff that I've accrued as far as knowledge of these things is concerned has been through early days tinkering, and yeah, quite honestly, it was initially, and not further on down the line as well, it's a case of experience sort of high-end sound reproduction systems, and fantastic, yeah, wow, but there's no way in hell that I could afford it. So trying to coax the best out of what I had sort of led me to understand some elements that are taken for granted as far as construction is concerned, and how that affects the sound, bizarrely in some ways. But yeah, that's pretty much how I ended up doing what I do now. Is I've developed an understanding and a knack for how stands, simple things like stands, yes, there are other elements that come into the equation, but how that affects electronics. And yeah, developing what I have developed, and yeah, coming up with certain formulas and approaches.
I'm just going to jump in there. I'm going to assume that there was quite a bit of literature out there that was available anyway to maybe fine-tune some of what you were doing on a kind of experimental basis.
Look, when I got involved with it, when I started understanding and developing stands from my perspective, there wasn't much out there. There was no guidance. There was no, there were elements out there that were hinted at more than anything else. Simple things like spikes. Question was why, and one of the strange things about simple thing of spikes is the misunderstanding around it is that initially, everybody said that spike isolates, decouples, and all sorts of other things, and that is why it improves the sound quality of whatever is supporting. And yeah, I thought, okay, well, let's figure this out. Let's see how the system works. And that kind of makes sense that, simple bit of mechanics, that you've got a very small surface contact area with very high pressure, and therefore, as a result of that, you can't have energy transferred between the small area and the large area. And yeah, okay. And then experimentation that I did, because there was some crude testing bits of gear that I came up with, simple things, and what that did amongst the simple things was a stethoscope. But never mind. Yeah, test out the theory behind the spike. You test out the theory behind the spike, and you realize that no, they've got it wrong. It actually works the other way around. It's actually a very efficient energy transfer device. So the reasons for spike working, they've got it wrong. It's wrong. And yeah, that was one of the small elements that we worked from.
And
yes.
I'd like to get back to that detail at some
Yeah.
point, because I think spikes were a big thing then, and I mean they've remained of interest to date.
Yeah.
I was wondering, designers and across the board in many spheres, they come up with an item, a design, a product, and as far as they're concerned, this is about as close as perfect as it can be. So, when you are putting it on a stand or a rack that is said to optimize its performance, are you in fact changing what it does, or what is happening?
I'm very aware of the possibility of change. What I have experienced with component designers is that, they become fixated on the electronics, on the electronic side of things, the accuracy of the electronics, and in the developmental stages, the thing is not in a chassis. It's a breadboard quite often, and before they go into production with it is, maybe a crude printed circuit board, and then things like the chassis is then modeled around it as almost an afterthought, without the understanding that a simple thing like the chassis and the chassis interaction with the printed circuit board and the components on that actually has an influence on the sound presentation. It changes. So, they do their design. It's theoretical initially, and then they put it into practice, and then it's a prototype. And before it's actually put into a chassis, that's actually for them the finished product. They put it into a chassis, and they've made changes actually that they're not possibly aware of. Early days, yes, that's the way it was done. I think that nowadays with ergonomics and the ability to do things on a virtual scale, yes, maybe chassis are brought into the equation. But the truth of the matter is it's chassis and component feet. It's almost like it's an afterthought that's introduced for ergonomic purposes and for the wrong reasons, in my opinion, the wrong reasons, because it's not common knowledge, or it's not understood that those elements and the interfaces and what it's standing on actually does change the sound. So I've been very pedantic about not introducing, let's say, anomalies or colorations or those kinds of things, trying to keep true to what the electronics is capable of.
No, actually, Hein, and I'm going to interrupt again, you do raise a very interesting point. Certainly with the rise of things like web interfaces, so that you don't necessarily need to physically walk over to the thing and turn a knob. Then it wasn't remote control, and now it surely is feasible to put an item of equipment and hide it completely, and then just operate it by a purely virtual interface. And certainly that's going to affect the kind of thing that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, Anthony. I think I'll just cover some of the discoveries that I've made regarding stands and electronics and how they interact. And the one of the things out there that has always been shouted about is vibration and the way it affects electronics, the way it affects turntables specifically. It's very easy to understand how vibration can affect a turntable. With other electronics, the understanding is not quite that clear, but the vibrational element of the component, that is actually in more than one form. You think that the component is vibrating because of sound pressure levels changing in the listening environment, and sound pressure that's actually exciting the component. Yes, absolutely, it is, but it's not just that. There are other elements as well. You do have, by virtue of the fact that most of the components have a power supply, the power supply actually oscillates. That introduces its own electromagnetic, electronic resonance. It's, you know, it's 50 hertz. It's oscillating at 50 hertz. They all do in this country. Elsewhere it'll be 60 hertz, but yeah. But it will not just be 50 hertz. It'll be 50 hertz and fundamentals of that will probably excite elements of the chassis. So it's that element that I've taken into account, come to understand that is also an issue. Yes, there are designers that are aware of that. You know, you've got guys like Jeff Rowland that with his power supplies, he'll try very carefully and all the rest to decouple the power supply so that that doesn't have as much of an influence, and that he came up with independently. So yeah, the element of taking the component out of the room, many years ago, when we were still doing our thing as Eagle Audio, I had a customer that did exactly what you're talking about, and he had a dedicated adjoining little almost soundproofed room so that he could take his equipment out of the audio environment acoustically, so that it doesn't have a reflective effect, and also because of the, well, actually, I think it was because he wanted to lock it away so that nobody could steal it more than anything else. But yeah, getting it out of the listening environment so that the sound doesn't rattle the stuff around. And what he found, independently, without any suggestion from my side, is that the sound structure, the stand, was in that environment still making a hell of a difference. And then it was also the realization that it's not just about vibration caused by the sound in the room. It's vibration through other means. Yes, obviously mechanical for a CD player or a turntable. There's mechanical energy, noise, vibration that is excited through the component itself, and it degrades things all further down the line, gets involved. If one can manage that, that's one of the things that I'm quite pedantic about, is this isolation of vibration. It's a really great idea, and it's a nice line of thought. But my approach is different in that if you isolate the component, the sound pressure waves, the sound is still going to excite the component. What then? Where's it going to go? You know, it's going to collect in the component and it's going to shake it a bit more. So one of the objectives is, rather than trying to decouple, isolate from the sound, that you can't do that, let's face it, is to take the resonant energy, the vibration that you have in the component, and try and get rid of it in a different way. Getting rid of it in a different way, yes, there are things out there where you can dampen it and supposedly convert the resonant energy into heat energy. Yeah, that is an approach. Or you mechanically couple the whole system. So you do just the opposite to what one would think. is a good idea of decoupling and isolating, and you couple it, and you drain off the residual energy vibration, and you drain it off. Fortunately, in our country, we've got mass in our rooms. We've got solid wooden floor, solid floors, solid concrete floors for the most part. So drain off the energy, make the whole system, make it so that it is directional to some extent. So you're draining off energy into the area of highest mass, the floor. And through that, you are addressing problems of residual mechanical noise, energy, vibration, and sound noise, and electrical vibration noise that is introduced into the system. Address it that way. And look, the bottom line is that, yes, I've over the years, I've tried different ways of getting the best out of the equipment. Just and not from a technical perspective. You know, you can try and analyze and use technology to see what is happening on a screen or otherwise. I've always relied on my ears, or not always, but for the most part, it's a case of, does it translate into something sounding better?
Just hold that thought there, and I'm going to interject to remind our participants here, our audience, that okay, your microphones are muted at this stage. There'll be plenty of opportunity maybe later to have a chat directly with our guest. Or of course, if you'd like to make use of the chat facility, please do that, and we can ask the questions as we go along. And Hein, yeah, if you would just proceed then. So if I'm correct in understanding what you're talking about there, you are trying to not just kill the sound at source or move it, you're wanting to move it somewhere else to dissipate it or to absorb it.
Yeah.
The vibration rather, not the sound.
Yeah. I think I like to call it manage it, because, you know, vibration and what is happening in a component, in the chassis, yeah, it is energy. It is a form of energy that is produced, that is exacerbated in some cases, that is manipulatable. The nonsense of being able to dissipate completely or to eliminate is a nonsense fallacy. I'm sorry, but from a physics perspective, you can't take that energy and make it disappear. Yeah, there are things out there where it can convert the energy into another form. So yes, you've got your elastomers, or your, yeah, the Americans like to call it elastomers, but viscoelastic polymers, and things like that can convert the vibrational energy into heat energy. Yeah, lekker, cool. If you analyze it very carefully, you'll see that is extremely inefficient. You've got something like a 3% efficiency of it. So yeah, it does work, but it's also got a lot of variables attached to it, whereas simply trying to take the energy and redirect it, if you like. Yeah, so it doesn't interfere with trying to eliminate it completely. The right way to do it is very, very complicated, and the results yielded are not justified. It's just
okay. So about those methods that you do then yourself use to accomplish that goal, tell us a bit about how you do manage, redirect those nasty vibrations.
So part of the trick is understanding that the system as a whole. that the system as a whole consists of the room architecture, the components, the chassis itself, the printed circuit board, the material that the printed circuit board is made of, the way that the printed circuit board is attached to the chassis, the way the chassis is attached to the surface that it's standing on, and take all of those things into account to try and drain off energy. So draining off energy off a chassis as efficiently as possible, and also make it directional to some extent. You don't want that energy to be taken off, only to be reflected back in. So in trying to do that, there are elements that you look at with regards to materials and how materials interact with vibration and sound, and manipulating those materials so that they do, to some extent, it would be wonderful to think that you can create an energy vortex through gizmos and materials, but it's not quite an energy vortex. But what you
sounds very Matrix-like.
Yeah, it can.
Tell us, you're talking about materials. I mean, what sorts of materials are we talking about?
So yes, you can.
Space age, NASA stuff that you'll have to kill. You shoot us if you tell us.
Absolutely can get involved with those things. So elements that are important in the design are things like speed transfer. You want to get the vibration away from the equipment as fast as possible. If you get it away too fast, then you end up with other issues. When I say too fast, the interfaces between the components, the feet and the stand and the supporting structure of the shelves and the stand itself, and all the way through, you could end up with a situation where if the speed of that element is too high, that there's nowhere for the energy to go. The energy is then reflected back. So yeah, as I say about directionality. So what I have found is that you can manipulate certain elements, certain components, certain materials in such a way that they do act as they have it like a diode effect. So it's directional, and it's at high speed, and obviously one of the considerations is you want that energy transfer to happen quite a wide frequency spectrum. You don't want it to be frequency dependent or specific. So what we do is we try and use materials that don't have a sonic signature. They don't have a specific sonic signature. If it does have a specific sonic signature, there are ways to lessen the amplitude of its fundamental. I don't want to get too technical now, but essentially you're looking to not have a high Q at a specific fundamental. You want a lower Q across a wider frequency spectrum, and then you can deal with it, and then you can manage it, and get away with it. So yes, there are materials that. One of the issues that I found is that materials have a sonic signature, and that sonic signature is actually to some extent imparted on what it absorbs and transfers. So if you have an homogeneous material, one of the issues that you have there is it becomes selective as far as what frequency spectrum it dominates and it transfers. So things like glass. Oh wow, I'd love to be able to use glass, but glass, is very specific as far as what it likes to transfer. There's other elements that are an issue with glass. So compositing the material so that you know that steel, speed-wise, is awesome. and steel generally will preserve your frequency spectrum quite nicely all the way across the board. The issue with steel is that, again, you have a certain characteristic that is imparted on what it's doing. And one of the discoveries is that it's about the structure of the sound and even an odd order harmonics. Now I'm going off on a tangent there that is like really strange, but
it's Hein, you're among friends.
it's yeah. A study that was done ages ago. Someone published a paper in the Audio Engineers Journal about the effect of even order and even and odd order harmonics in our perception of sound and music reproduction, and that even order harmonics, if they're exacerbated, puts a smile on your face.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice, sounds good. Odd order harmonics makes you frown a bit, and there seems to be a lack of connection with the reproduced sound, if that is the case. Now, what I've found is something quite bizarre in that organic materials in a stand seem to favor even order harmonics, in that they may actually introduce a little bit of exacerbation in that, but it sounds more natural. So that element included in the stand construction, you can actually hear it. And functionally, yes, simple thing like a wood composite, it works nicely.
If I may then, to put it in simple language, are you saying that it would be a good idea maybe to put that very hard, glossy, solid state device on a wood composite stand? One would like complement the other type of thing, or am I misunderstanding you?
You could do that, but then again, that to me is manipulation, which is quite easy, and that's changing the functionality of the component. It's changing to some extent even the tonality of the component. You can do that.
Okay.
It's obviously quite subtle,
yeah. Yeah, Hein, you mentioned specifically wood composite. Is that, and I'm going to ask you another question that's come up in the chat line, by the way.
Yeah.
So my question then is the composite thing, is that because you're trying to combine various positive attributes? Is that
absolutely,
what
you're absolutely nail on the head? Yeah, rather than trying to take a set of rules governed by a type of material and have that material's characteristics, then you use that to transfer the energy. If you mix up the materials, simple as that, and there are strong points to them and you combine them in a certain way, that what you end up with is something that works across the board, frequency wise, amplitude wise, and all of those together. So yeah, rather than taking a homogeneous material like glass and trying to get it to work by itself, no. So take glass, yes, if you want to use glass, if you have to use glass, then use glass, and then you add something to it to eliminate the downside of glass. So it's very prominent, fundamental. Yes, there's an issue with that. The exacerbation, so yes, you can, most definitely, you can toy around with tuning. That's a discovery as well. It's not just the material of the stand itself or the shelves itself. The interfaces come into play there as well. So yeah, what we have found is that a shelf, let's say it's a multi-material shelf, it's a composite essentially, that on spikes let's say it's stainless steel spikes, that's standing on brass as an interface between that and the next component. The brass actually has a characteristic that you can pick up, where it's sort of, to some extent, it ignores the even order harmonics, or the way it actually works out. I haven't figured it out honestly, specifically, but you can hear it. You can.
Right.
Analyze
Which brings me to a question from the chat line, and that is, you've said a lot of your evaluation is done by ear. What other kinds of equipment do you use in testing? What sort of R&D do you do anyway? And I think, what was the other question? So park that. We'll hold the thought.
Yeah.
And then the other question from Chris was, the sound that issues, I guess, in the room, as you've talked about earlier, what amount, what proportion of this, what percentage of it is liable to be absorbed by the equipment? And you know, what effect does this have? Does it blur the sound? What does it do? That sound that the equipment picks up, and that your stand then has to manage. Right, over to you.
Okay. Let me answer your last question first. So what we managed to do with essentially trying to drain off the residual energy vibration to manage that is you will find better resolution for start. So yeah, that's self-explanatory. Better resolution is just what it is. Through better resolution, you will also find that low order harmonics are more obvious. You have that. You have the element that I've mentioned before of speed. So dynamics are improved. Dynamic range seems to improve. I do use a lot of my customers as guinea pigs, I'll be quite honest, and to get a response. And it's very easy for me to do my R&D in a way that I end up losing perspective on what I'm doing. It's got to be objective, and it's very difficult to stay objective when you get into a mode of thinking. So I use my customers to give me feedback as to what their perception is, rather than me saying, no, this is what it's going to do, and this is what to expect, and so on and so forth. And what the customers give back to me regarding the dynamic range is a blackness to the silent parts. That's a nice way of putting it. It's why is it quieter? I mean, you know, background quieter, that doesn't make much sense that it would do that, but it does. Focus is, yeah, it's more, as I say again, your resolution improvement gives you an element of focus.
And this is irrespective of I guess, you know, the gross vibrations that you would expect from electromechanical. I mean, this is inclusive of what you said earlier, which is your electronically kind of introduced through the chassis, which is to an extent also electromechanical.
Yeah, it's look, rather than trying to identify that type of vibration, and then structure-borne vibration that we haven't mentioned before, that may be introduced because you have a suspended wooden floor and paper walls and so on and so forth. Yeah, those elements that come into play, address all of them together, you know, rather than independently, because yeah, it then becomes more defined in that one would have to analyze the component itself, determine what it's doing specifically in all the areas, and then address those as a problem independently. So it's a case of, well, you know, the vibration does interfere with the production.
Does this mean, Hein, that all your stuff is bespoke? That it's everything is built for a particular purpose, or do you have a stock item line, like a stock stand or a stock rack?
That's what I'm saying. We really can't do bespoke for a component other than its geometry. Because otherwise, you end up with so many different, with other variables and flexibility of the whole system as well. Audiophiles, music lovers love to change the equipment, and you design something for something specific. You want it to be able to work just as efficiently and effectively for the next replacement. And yes, there have been designers out there that have actually taken that into account, that kind of agree with what I'm doing in my approach. Going back to Mike Moffat, with his chassis, he always put a mechanical ground. And the concept of mechanical ground, I've always said, is freaking awesome. Mickey Mouse rubber feet, I hate that. Rubber does funny things that it's not supposed to. There's too many variables involved with that. Mechanical ground. It's also only recently that I heard that Goldman, they've actually made a big thing about mechanical grounding, and I shouldn't be calling it mechanical grounding because they hold the copyright to the term mechanical grounding for their components. So,
but I think it's a generic term.
It should be a generic term, but somewhere there's a trademark on it. So in South Africa, we'll call it mechanical earthing. How's that?
Okay, there are several more questions that have come in, and I've got a few more, so I think we're going to just move along a bit there. Now, I was wondering, are equipment stands capable of being upgraded? In other words, is there a modular approach that one can do, or is it like that's a one-off? If you've reached a certain plateau, you take it away and get a new one?
Anthony, that's one of the things that I have been for a number of years trying to work on, that we can do a totally modular, functional system. The issue with it is that the truth behind it is that, yes, internationally, what I've seen is that there is a lot of modularity to other designs out there. The stackable thing, cool, that is so awesome from a ergonomic and logistics perspective, because you've got a lightweight thing that you can put in a cardboard box and you can air freight it anywhere in the world. The truth of the matter is that the mechanics of a stackable thing, they don't translate, they don't work as well as our system, which is an isometrically clamped whole system together. So upgradability, to some extent, there are some elements where if we budget conscious, we'll cut corners with things like the feet, your stand to floor interface. So yes, there you can upgrade to better feet, better interfaces for your stand to your floor. But the elements that can be upgraded, not really. For locally, if customer wants to upgrade, then we gladly trade in his old unit and we look at the more expensive, more efficient options. Because we have found that number of energy drain points, in other words, number of legs, a stupid thing like that makes a difference as far as its efficiency is concerned.
Well, that certainly brings me to a question that I guess would be on every audiophile's mind. If you're a budget-conscious audiophile, where would you be looking to get the best bang for your buck when it comes to stand, rack? What should you be? What piece of equipment or what area should you be looking at?
Yeah, so with our component stands, our entry level actually is quite an eye opener, ear opener, should I say? With what it does relative to your Morkel's wall unit, or those things out there that I cringe at, that is a passive resonator box footer that it really doesn't do anything any justice. Piece of furniture. Entry-level unit works amazingly well relative to.
If I may, Hein, I don't know, maybe just got our wires crossed there. What I mean is, if you're somebody on a budget, you've got some good kit and you need to support it, but now, should you be looking at speakers, your amplifier, your turntable? What part of that setup would you get best effect, best bang for your buck? In other words, not whether you buy your stuff or Morkel's or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
But what particular componentry should you be looking at to put on a decent stand?
You'd have to look at the whole system, quite honestly, and assess from there. Speaker stands across the board seem to generally improved speaker stands, decent speaker stands, not pot plant holders that are designed for the purpose, not purely aesthetics or getting it at the right height. Speaker stands, I'd say, there you're probably going to get the biggest improvement for starters, and then component stands. And the old fallacy was turntable. If you've got a turntable, absolutely that makes the biggest difference. That was the old adage. And over the years, when we went through the phase of being analog and turntables and the concentration on that, yes, there we can coax out a lot for the turntable. And then when we lost the whole analog thing and we went to digital, it was a case of what the hell now? And the realization that early days I was focusing on, I admit it, turntables. And it was with the advent of the digital age and CD players, and realizing that it makes with anything mechanical, it makes a big difference. With the non-mechanical things, your preamp and power amplifiers, DAC, etc., you'd think that, it doesn't have that much of an effect, but strangely enough, power amplifiers, my goodness, power amplifier with normal rubber feet on a tiled floor, straight on. I mean, you're connecting the component to the area of highest mass. It should work exceptionally well. It doesn't. It actually doesn't. Power amplifiers on a stand, it works. But getting back to your question of what first, what we've also found though is that creating synergy between the components, so putting all of your components in a dedicated stand, there's some interaction between the components that creates a better synergy. So trying to have one of the components sort of being more important than the others as far as properly supporting it. Look, turntables always, yes, they're strange beasts. have all sorts of elements to them that you've got to take into account. And yeah, that is a separate avenue all on its own, in that you'd think that, okay, this system works across the board for almost everything. And then you find out that there are some turntables specifically that throw a spanner in the works, and they don't want the vibrational energy that they create or that's created around them to be drained off.
Now you're going to tell us what the names of those turntables are, aren't you?
Suspended sub-chassis turntables generally throw a spanner in the works. A Lin specifically. The way a Lin is put together, and the spin-offs of suspended sub-chassis lighter weight turntables, shows one that the chassis itself and what it's made up of actually contributes to the sonic signature of the whole presentation.
Yep.
And once you start messing with that equation by eliminating that, you change the sound altogether to a point where if you want to make a Lin sound thin and anemic, put it on our top of the range sound structure just as. In the case of a Lin, it needs a shunt, so that you don't transfer the energy away from the chassis as fast as you usually would. You still do it, but you do it slower. So
yeah,
you put in a shunt.
wouldn't it be better and a whole lot easier if these guys came to you beforehand and said, this is what we plan to do, which is just a way of leading me to my question, that is, have you collaborated with anybody? Do you, or is this something that you'd see some benefit in?
Yes, over the years I have, to some extent, but there's always that element of ego and pride when it comes to the designers themselves, and thinking that they know best. And also one of the elements that do take into consideration is flexibility across a wide audience. So yeah, we've had the situation with Mark Levinson himself and Mark Levinson the company, where interacting with them, understanding that one of their issues that they have had in the past that they have to address and include in their design is that the component will not leave marks on the furniture, which is like ridiculous. And this whole story I got from them about their collaboration with 3M as an interface component, which is the foot piece of the cabinet or the chassis of the whatever. And guess what? What their objective was to not leave marks on the furniture or whatever they're going to place it on.
Well, I think that it is certainly a consideration. As I said in my introduction, I think we're all pretty well aware that if this thing looks like a building site, then it's not going to fly in a lot of homes around the world for very important aesthetic reasons. You mentioned the marks, and that I saw a question earlier, and I forgot to ask you, but from Chris. In fact, it's from Joshua about. He's mentioned the name of the product, Symposium Rollerballs. I don't know what those are. Now, I know, I'm guessing these may be metal. I don't know, or at least not rubber, because you said you don't like rubber. Yeah. What do you think about those as feet?
Okay, I've mentioned my issue that I have with squishy rubber specifically. The guys at Classe, they brought out the new chassis and they had these squishy rubber feet, And that was part of the equation, saying that the squishy rubber feet it works so well, and it was specially developed. And with their particular component, you could stack it. And then my question was, how does it affect the bottom one with the squishy rubber feet? Because you're changing the mechanical, you're changing mechanics by putting that bottom one under more compression than the top one. But anyway, sorry, going back to the symposium rollerballs, feet, components feet. Components feet, a lot of the time, are honestly an afterthought by the designer. It's a piece of rubber because everybody uses it, it's easy, it's not going to mark the furniture, so put on rubber feet. Anything else other than little blocks of wood, rather than the rubber feet, interchange with that, and you will notice that there is an improvement. Other materials as feet. Aluminium still works damn well. You know, going back to the Michelle cones that they had out years ago, but getting rid of the rubber feet. And yes, in a lot of cases, things like the symposium rollerballs are more about not how well they work, but how badly the rubber feet work. So changing them for that, yes. I say yes, cool. Rollerballs, Serapucks, the Serapucks, the way those things work is actually not the way a lot of the designer sellers of the footers, they don't work the way they say they work. But it doesn't matter. They do work. Again, it's just replacing the rubbish rubber feet. So yeah, rollerballs, cool. Squash balls, no, sorry. The squash ball.
Keep them for the squash ball.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things that if you've got a very aggressive forward sounding piece of solid state gear, yeah, maybe you can smudge it by putting in your bits of rubber, your, you know, Sorbothane. There was a period years ago that Sorbothane was the thing to use. Also in context, one of the things that I found is, it's not unique, but that is almost unique to us in South Africa, is our architecture. The Americans, they rave on about the squishy elastomers and isolating devices and all the rest. Yeah, they've got suspended wooden floors and paper walls. They don't have an area of high mass that you can transfer the energy away from. And from what I can understand as well is a lot of the Americans seem to be living next to a railroad or on a seismic plate, or maybe they're actually living on top of an underground railroad, because that seems to be where their obsession lies, is eliminating vibration that is coming up through the floor. We don't have that problem here, so you know, it's a case of fine. If you want something that is going to still work nicely while the jackhammer is busy jackhammering next door or in the next room, then yeah, if you're going to listen under those conditions, I suppose you've got a different approach. You need a different approach, maybe. But
okay, Hein, look, we've see we've just passed the hour mark, and so I'm going to start wrapping up.
Oh my goodness, sorry, man.
Not at all. That's the whole point. That's why you're here. I think it's important, and I haven't raised this before, so perhaps it's a good opportunity now. You're based in Gauteng, but how do people contact you, and have you got distributors in other centers?
Okay, the history of Eagle Audio and Sound Structures has been that we have in the past distributed through retailers. And yeah, we did get to a point, I got to a point where firstly, a lot of the retailers disappeared. And secondly, yeah, it was just, I don't know, I just still feel a bit uncomfortable about the fact that the retailers have such a nice fat margin. So yeah, our website has not been it's not been up and running for a while. I'm concentrating sort of on redesign of that. We're still in the process of that. But Facebook, we do have a Facebook site, so you can contact me that way.
And that is Sound
and yeah. And as far as distribution is concerned, as I say, there are still some retailers out there that have the word out, and but primarily, yeah, just straight to Sound Structures is how you can contact me, and yeah, we can sort out. So.
All right, and one assumes that certainly just to look at them, this is a premium product, so it would generally, I'm going to guess, would attract premium prices. You know, if you'd give us some sort of idea of what we're talking about then in terms of your pricing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that by virtue of the way I am, the way I do things, that yeah, the stuff is relatively speaking expensive, but component stands, we do have an entry level 4-shelf unit that ex factory is about 7,000 Rand.
Mm-hmm.
The speaker stands, yeah, the speaker stands, I've always been of the opinion that a speaker stand should be customized for the customer, and
yep.
to a large extent for the loudspeaker. Speaker stands start off at 2,500 Rand a pair.
Can you order those things ex factory, or do you have, or is there a retail outlet, or does one just go direct to you?
There are retailers out there that are selling them. There are online retailers that are selling them, but yeah, you know, coming straight to me is, yeah, that is the better option. The reason being is that we no longer do our normal production line stuff. There was a time in the past where yes, there was a call for production line stuff, but the difference from my perspective, doing a normal production line entry level unit to something that is slightly more bespoke doesn't make that much difference to the price. And yeah, it's better for me. It's nicer for me to be able to offer a customer something that they would like rather than something that they have to take, if that makes any sense. So, and yes, we try and cater for all tastes as far as aesthetics are concerned, as far as the finishes are concerned. So one of the issues that I have with the retailers is that they will, you know, say to the customer, there's what we've got in stock and that's what I'd like you to take. And, you know, the customer's looking at it and thinking, but their monoblocks are not really going to fit in there. And yeah, you sort of, yes, the retailer should be in a position to say, well, look, we can have it made for you. Or just give Hein a call and say, hey, you know, these are my components, this is my budget, what can we do? Because yeah, I've given you the entry level prices, and yeah, I see that there are some of my customers that are listening in now where they felt the other end of the scale where we've gone to extremes. We do have ranges. We have the basic, and we have the extreme, and we have the reference. And yes, you know, because of my nature and just the way I like to get the best value for money out of, you do have diminishing returns with more expensive options, but my goodness, and they do work better, you know.
Okay, then one last question. before I sign off and open the floor to the participants. We've talked a lot about materials and their effects, and a little bit about aesthetics. And I was wondering, Hein, to what extent does the actual look of an equipment support or a stand, does that have or can that have an effect on the sound?
That's actually a damn good question, and absolutely yes. Acoustically, if you
check
have,
me out. We want 5 minutes more.
my dear Dr. Iqbal, sorry. Yes, so physically, acoustically, there could be an interaction if your front facade is too obvious. You get reflections off the stand, so that element comes into play. The shaping of the shelves, you can shape a shelf to change the residual, the modes that you will always have in an excited flat plane. So on a shelf, there will be hot spots and cold spots that you can change the position of by changing the shape of the shelf. Incidentally, yes, obviously it's very subjective as far as aesthetics are concerned. I try and stick to our basic formula for putting stands together. There is a lot of flexibility, so things like shaping, mass of, we can manipulate it to make it work. But yeah, aesthetics, quite honestly, have always been secondary. I can make a really pretty looking stand, again, it's subjective, that wouldn't function sonically as well as, in some cases, slightly more industrial looking units that we do have.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's also one of those things that over the years I've opened up the floor and said to guys, look, what do you want? Well, what don't you like aesthetically about it? You can change that. There are options out there. Like I say, flexibility is one of the things where we have gravitated towards to make something that you think looks nice, because our original reference stand, I mean, the thing, it makes a hell of a statement, but it is definitely not, it has absolutely no wife acceptance factor.
Well, I think on that note, before we go further down that rabbit hole, because that way only lies trouble, I'm going to have to say it's been a great evening with you, Hein. I'm going to open the floor to the participants, but before we do that, thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. And thank you, Hein, for it's been a long and quite fascinating in places and quite mysterious in places talk, but always enlightening. And thanks very much for giving us your insights into the dark arts of how to make your instrument rack really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Hein.
Anthony.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing that struck me was there is no standard sort of thing, So if I order a rack with that sort of measurements and I'm going to put in a NAD 3020 or some other VA Predator or something, Hein doesn't know that beforehand.
He does.
So he does?
Yes. Can I give you my experience, please?
Yes, we'd love to hear that, Iqbal.
All right, look, I had a very nice system. And before getting a rack or whatever you call it, I had something that was made DIY. And it wasn't really doing the trick for almost anything from the world at the time, which I researched. I went everywhere. I saw the big things that big guys were using. And somehow it just didn't appeal to me beyond it looked nice. And looking at the way it was sent over and whether it was customized, the look of it, I wasn't too thrilled. And then I saw some South African manufacturers. I think I saw Lee Ranj and a few other guys in Cape Town, and I stumbled upon Hein. So I called him, and Hein was more interested in providing a solution for me. And for that, he asked me, what do you have? What are my problems with the sound system I'm having? And what would you like me to do for you? And I was caught off guard. So I had to explain to him what I had. And I had to explain to him the kind of sound I wanted. And he got to understand my needs, pretty much like a tailor or a doctor, or whatever it may be. So he worked out my budget. He worked out what equipment I had. He worked out exactly what kind of sound I liked, what music I played. And he set about working on it, and he came up with a solution, and I looked at it, and I said, well, okay, maybe we can do this or do that. And I got curious. And in the process, I learned of the extensive engineering that goes into making those racks and plinths and stands. It's not just a pretty look. There's some solid engineering. And I must have bugged him for months while he was explaining that to me. And he was working out coefficients and working out different lengths, different thicknesses of the wood, the kind of grain he was using, the kind of wood he was using. And I would have liked him to explain more about that, but I think that'll take a long time. And then once all that kind of got sorted out,
Fading away, Iqbal.
We're losing you, Iqbal.
Oh dear, something has gone wrong.
Happens.
Maybe I can say something before Iqbal cuts me off.
Well,
I
Barbara,
think the nice thing what Iqbal is getting down to is that, yes, we do have the capacity to be able to customize very specifically. And yes, we do have a catalog with standard component stands in that I try and, well, I've modeled them around 19-inch components and 17-inch components and with generic spacing, but because of demand, we don't have that much of that anymore. It doesn't make that much difference from our manufacturing perspective to change the spacing between the shelves. I'm not going to put in something that is going to be for a Krell Neo, that is monstrously big and heavy and wide and all the rest, just in case your NAD 3020 is going to go into that space. It's not necessary, So, but what I'm saying is certain elements of customization, yes, it's not a problem for us to do that.
I'm back.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, now that's better.
Right.
Thanks, Iqbal.
And then I was astonished that he was talking about just the chamfer that goes around the edge of the rack. And then the veneers he was choosing the thickness of the veneer, the thickness of the chamfer, the shape of it, and even the shape of the entire rack, where he had a concave surface, a concave front, back, and sides. And all those things really made a lot of sense to me from an engineering point of view. Right down to the way he was going to get all the racks bound together. And for that, he used he used a stainless steel rod going from the top to the bottom. And the space between the stainless steel rod and the aluminum casing around it was filled with a special material of a specific kind of density. And I was shocked that the guy went right down to that level. And he was choosing different densities and whatnot, and he finally got it right. And then even in the feet that he used was also, it was engineered. It wasn't just putting in any damn feet. He chose the right feet or whatever it may be. And the thing about Hein's product is anybody in the world can make it, but it'll cost a lot of money. And then you can't send it down for someone to assemble over here. He has to assemble it, torque it correctly, and then send it to you fully assembled in a proper crate the way I got it. Now, can you imagine the cost of that thing coming from overseas? It's just going to be prohibitive. So if you want the real thing, you do it right in this country and you'll get the best thing the world has to offer. And it won't be something that can be assembled over there or can be disassembled, put it into a small box, send it here, and you assemble it yourself. No, it's very solid stuff, solid engineering, and I heard the difference. And it's here for quite a few, it's quite some time it's here, and it's flawless, the paintwork is perfect, and it's so heavy, I can't even move it. It's proper. And I'm glad I didn't go for some big American brand name, which would have cost me double and would have been really inferior. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Iqbal.
Thanks,
That's
Iqbal.
great to hear that testimonial. Yeah, that's great. Well, anybody else want to contribute or ask or fire away?
Can't think of anything.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Fine.
Chris, if you will draw proceedings to a close, then we can bid each other good night.
Thank you, Hein. The recording, the session has been recorded. It'll be on the SAAV forum and on YouTube as well, with the appropriate pictures and things. I'll text them from your Facebook page, Hein.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much once again. Cheers,
Okay.
guys.
Bye. Good night.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Nice.